The red sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the mining site as Commander Zixthek checked the daily reports. His 6 legs moved with practiced ease across the metal platform, while his compound eyes scanned the data streams. The HFY had been mining this planet for 3 cycles now, and the operation was going perfectly. No interference from the Galactic Council, no competing claims from other species, and most importantly, no primitive locals to cause problems. The planet was supposed to be empty. All their scans had shown no intelligent life, just some basic plant forms and small creatures that posed no threat. It was exactly what the HFY corporate collective wanted, a rich world they could strip clean without anyone asking uncomfortable questions about permits or environmental impact studies. Zixthak clicked his mandibles in satisfaction as he reviewed the extraction numbers. The rare metals they were pulling from the ground would make the corporate collective very wealthy. His personal commission would be enough to buy a nice estate on the HFY homeworld. Everything was going according to plan. That was when his communication device started buzzing with an urgent alert. "Commander," came the voice of his sensor operator, Crickstall. "We have an unknown contact approaching the system. Single vessel. Primitive design, but it's heading directly for our position." Zixthek's antennae twitched with annoyance. How primitive are we talking about? Some scavenger looking for easy salvage? No, sir, this is different. The ship appears to be using chemical propulsion with some kind of crude nuclear drive. Very basic by our standards, but it's clearly built for long-range travel. And, Commander, it's broadcasting some kind of signal. Zixthek moved quickly to the command center, his claws clicking against the metal floor. Through the viewing screen, he could see a small dot growing larger against the starfield. The ship was indeed primitive, a blocky, functional design that looked like it had been built by someone who cared more about getting from point A to point B than about looking impressive. What kind of signal? He asked. Crickstall manipulated. His controls and mathematical sequences began flowing across the screen. Simple patterns at first, prime numbers, basic geometric relationships, and more complex formulas. It appears to be some kind of first contact protocol, sir. Mathematical. Concepts that any intelligent species should recognize. Zixthak studied the approaching vessel with growing concern. This was not supposed to happen. The HFY had chosen this system specifically because it was supposed to be uninhabited. If there was an intelligent species here, and they had developed space travel, then the corporate collective's mining operation was completely illegal under galactic law. "Do we know what species this is?" he asked. "Negative, sir. The ship design doesn't match anything in our databases. But based on the construction methods and technology level, I'd estimate they're probably a newly spacefaring race. First or second-generation interstellar capability at most." The unknown ship continued its approach, still broadcasting its mathematical greeting. Zixthak felt his stress glands releasing chemicals into his bloodstream. A new species meant investigations, questions, and possibly the end of their profitable mining operation. The corporate collective did not react well to commanders who cost them money. "Sir," Crickstall reported, "the vessel is now requesting permission to approach and establish communication. They're using standard mathematical protocols, but they're also trying what appears to be audio transmission." Zixthak listened to the crackling static that emerged from the speakers, and then heard something that made his chitin crawl. A voice. Not the clicking, buzzing, or whistling sounds that most galactic species used for communication, but something different. The sounds were varied and complex, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost musical. "Unknown vessel," the voice said in heavily accented but recognizable galactic standard. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earthship Dakota. We come in peace and seek to establish contact with your civilization." Earth. Zixthak had never heard of it, which meant this. species was definitely not part of the Galactic Council. They were completely unknown, which made them both dangerous and valuable. If the Vex-High could establish first contact and control the relationship, it might be profitable. But if these humans discovered the illegal mining operation, it would. Be a disaster. Double quote, sir. What are your orders? Crystal asked. Zixthik made his decision quickly. The mining operation was too valuable to risk, and the corporate collective had made it clear that nothing should interfere with their profits. Send a warning signal. Tell them this is a restricted military zone, and they need to change course immediately. The warning was transmitted, but the human ship continued its approach. If anything, it seemed to be moving faster now, as if the warning had somehow encouraged them rather than deterred them. They're not responding to our warning, sir, Crickstall reported. In fact, they're transmitting again. The human voice came through the speakers again, and this time there was something different in the tone. Not threatening, but somehow more determined. Vex-High vessels, this is Captain Morrison. We understand your warning, but we're not here to cause trouble. We're explorers from Earth, and this is humanity's first contact with another intelligent species. We'd like to talk. The word sent a chill through Zixthak's body. First contact. This was exactly what he had hoped to avoid. If this became an official first contact situation, the Galactic Council would become involved, and their illegal mining operation would be discovered within days. Sir, they're now within weapons range, his tactical officer reported. Should we power up the defense? Grid? Zixthak looked at the primitive ship on his screen. It was small, lightly armed if armed at all, and clearly no match for Vex-High military technology. The crew probably didn't even know they were about to die. Part of him felt something that might have been regret, but the corporate collective had been very clear about the consequences of failure. Power up all weapon systems, he ordered. Target their engines first. Maybe we can disable them and claim it was an accident. The Vex-High plasma batteries charged with a low humming sound. On the screen, the human ship continued its peaceful approach, still broadcasting its mathematical greeting and requests for communication. The crew inside had no idea that they were about to become the first casualties of humanity's entrance into galactic politics. Weapons ready, sir, came the report. Zixthak took one last look at the small ship and its brave crew. Fire. The plasma bolts struck the Dakota with devastating force. Bright flashes of energy tore through the hull, sending chunks of metal spinning into space. The small human ship lurched violently to one side, trailing fire and debris. Emergency lights flickered on and off as the vessel's systems failed one by one. Captain Jake Morrison felt the impact throw him against his command chair. Blood ran down his face from where his head had struck the console, but he was already moving, his hands flying over the controls even as sparks showered around him. The ship was dying, but it was not dead yet. Lisa, Pete, report, he shouted over the screaming alarms. Hull breach in sections 3 and 4, came the voice of Dr. Lisa Webb from the science station. Her voice was steady despite the chaos around them. Life support is failing, but we've got maybe 10 minutes of air left. Engines are gone, Engineer Pete Collins called out from his position near the back of the bridge. We're going down whether we want to or not. But Jake, I'm reading a planet below us. If we can control our descent, we might survive the crash. Morrison wiped blood from his eyes and looked at the tactical display. The alien ships were still out there, waiting to see if they needed to finish the job. But they had stopped firing, which meant they probably thought the Dakota was already finished. They don't know us very well, do they? Morrison said with a grim smile. He had been a Marine for 15 years before joining the space program, and Marines had a saying, "You're not dead until you're dead. Until then, you keep fighting. The Dakota hit the planet's atmosphere like a burning meteor. The remaining hull, plating glowed red-hot as friction tore at the ship. Morrison fought with the controls, using every trick he had learned in 20 years of flying to keep them from becoming a crater. The ship bounced and skipped across the upper atmosphere before finally committing to its final descent. Brace for impact. Morrison yelled. The Dakota hit the ground with tremendous force, plowing a deep furrow through the rocky soil before finally coming to rest against a small hill. Steam rose from the wreckage as hot metal met the planet's thin atmosphere. For a moment, everything was silent except for the settling sounds of twisted metal. Then Morrison opened his eyes. He was hanging upside down in his command chair, held in place by his safety harness. Blood was still running from the cut on his forehead, and he could feel at least 3 broken ribs grinding against each other when he breathed. His left arm was bent at an angle that told him it was probably broken. But he was alive, and that was what mattered. "Lisa? Pete?" he called out. "Still here," Webb replied weakly. She was trapped under a fallen beam, but Morrison could see her moving. "Pete's unconscious, but breathing. We need to get out of here before this thing decides to explode." Morrison released his harness and dropped to what had been the ceiling of the bridge. Every movement sent waves of pain through his body, but he ignored them. Pain was just information, and right now the information was telling him he was still functional enough to move. He helped Webb free herself from the debris, noting that she had a nasty gash on her leg and her right shoulder was dislocated. Together, they managed to wake up Collins, who had a concussion and what looked like internal injuries. All 3 of them were hurt, but all 3 of them were alive. "We need to assume they're coming to check on us," Morrison said as they gathered what supplies they could from the wreckage. Standard procedure would be to send a ground team to confirm the kill. "Can we fight them?" Collins asked, trying to focus his eyes despite his head injury. Morrison looked at their situation. They had some basic weapons, a small medical kit, emergency rations for a few days, and whatever they could salvage from the ship. Against an advanced alien military force, it should have been hopeless. But Morrison had spent his entire adult life preparing for hopeless situations. That was what Marines did. They took impossible situations and made them merely difficult. "We can try," he said. "Lisa, how long before you can patch us up enough to move?" Webb was already opening the thing. Medical kit with her good arm. "Give me 20 minutes and I can get us mobile. We won't be pretty, but we'll be functional." As she worked on their injuries, Morrison studied the terrain around their crash site. The aliens would expect to find bodies, not resistance. They would be overconfident, sloppy. That was good. Morrison had built his entire military career on taking advantage of overconfident enemies. 25 minutes later, Scout leader Vashka led a squad of Vex-High soldiers toward the crash site. They moved cautiously, but without real concern. Their weapons could kill most known species with a single shot, and they had already proven these humans were not particularly durable. Their ship had been destroyed easily enough. "Spread out and search for survivors," Vashka ordered. "The corporate collective wants to know what these creatures were doing here." The Viking squad moved through the wreckage, their weapons ready, but not particularly alert. They found the torn hull, the scattered debris, and the obvious signs of a catastrophic crash. Everything looked exactly as they had expected. That was when they heard the sound dot. It started low, barely audible over the wind. A rhythmic noise that grew slowly louder. It took Vashka a moment to recognize what it was. Because it was unlike anything in his experience, a laughter Morrison emerged from behind a piece of wreckage, his broken arm hanging at his side, blood still running down his face, but his eyes bright with something that looked disturbingly like amusement. Behind him came Webb, limping heavily but carrying a makeshift weapon. Collins brought up the rear, swaying slightly from his concussion, but still moving. "You know," Morrison said in heavily accented Galactic Standard, his voice carrying clearly across the crash site, "where I come from, it's considered rude to shoot at someone during a peaceful first contact." The HFY raised their weapons and fired. The energy bolts struck Morrison's center mass, the kind of shots that should have killed him instantly. Morrison staggered backward, smoke rising from his clothes where the energy had burned through. Then he straightened up, looked down at the burns on his chest, and started laughing harder. "Is that it?" he asked, taking a step forward. "On Earth, we call that a sunburn." The HFY fired again and again. Morrison took hit after hit, his body accumulating burns and wounds that should have dropped him. But instead of falling, he kept walking toward them, his laughter growing louder and more unsettling with each step. Behind him, Webb and Collins were also advancing, also taking hits, also refusing to fall down and die like they were supposed to. For the first time in his military career, Bashka felt something he had never experienced before. Fear, not of death, which was a risk any soldier accepted, but fear of something that simply would not die when it was supposed to. The humans kept coming, bleeding and burned, but still advancing, still laughing. And Vashka realized that everything his people knew about warfare was about to change. Vashka and his squad retreated to a safe distance, their compound eyes never leaving the three humans who had somehow survived multiple direct hits from HFY energy weapons. The scout leader's mandibles clicked nervously as he activated his communication device. "Command, this is Ground Team 1. We have a problem." Commander Zixthek's voice crackled through the speaker. "Report. Are the aliens dead?" "No, sir. They are very much alive. We shot them multiple times with standard energy weapons, and they ... They kept walking toward us, and, sir, they were laughing." There was a long pause before Zixthek responded. "Explain that again, Scout Leader." "The creatures absorbed direct hits from our weapons and continued to advance while making sounds that our translators identify as expressions of amusement." "I have never seen anything like it, sir." Back at the crash site, Morrison was examining his injuries with the casual interest of someone checking a minor scrape. The energy burns had charred his shirt and left angry red marks across his chest. But he was still breathing, still moving, still very much alive. "Well, that was educational," he said to Webb, who was using torn fabric from her uniform to bandage. "A plasma burn on her leg. Their weapons pack a punch, but nothing we can't handle." Collins was sitting on a piece of wreckage, holding his head and trying to focus his eyes. "Jake, remind me again why getting shot at is supposed to be funny?" Morrison's grin was visible even through the blood on his face. "Because, Pete, if they thought those little light shows were going to stop us, they obviously don't know the first thing about humans. And that gives us an advantage." Dr. Webb finished bandaging her wound and looked at both men with the expression she usually reserved for particularly interesting specimens. "You know, from a scientific perspective, this is fascinating. Their energy weapons appear to be designed for species with much lower pain tolerance and physical resilience than humans." "Makes sense," Morrison replied, checking the charge on his sidearm. "Most species probably never needed to evolve the kind of redundant systems we have. I mean, how many planets have sharks and bears and poisonous everything trying to kill you all at the same time?" Meanwhile, Zixthek was frantically reviewing every database the HFY had on known galactic species. Nothing matched what his ground team was reporting. No known race could survive multiple direct hits from military-grade energy weapons and continue functioning. The idea was absurd. Krikstal began a full scan of their crashed vessel. "I want to know everything about these creatures and where they come from." The sensor operator's antennae twitched as data flowed across his screens. Sir, I'm detecting some kind of information storage device that survived the crash. It appears to contain data about their home world. Put it on the main screen. What appeared before them made every HFY in the command center go very still. The planet Earth hung in space like a blue and white marble, beautiful and peaceful looking. But as the data files opened, they revealed something that defied belief. Sir, Kriegstall said in a voice that was barely a whisper, according to this data, their home world has a gravity that is 20% higher than standard galactic normal. The atmospheric pressure is dense enough to crush most spacefaring species. And, sir, the native life forms. Images flashed across the screen. Massive predators with teeth the size of HFY arms. Tiny creatures whose venom could kill in seconds. Plant life that could dissolve flesh. Weather patterns that could level entire cities. Geological activity that regularly reshaped continents. This cannot be accurate, Zixthek said, but his voice lacked conviction. There's more, sir. The humans evolved as what they call persistence hunters. They would chase prey animals for days without stopping until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies produce chemicals that allow them to ignore pain and continue functioning even when severely injured. And, sir, they have what they call redundant organs. If one part of their body stops working, other parts can take over. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. They had not encountered some primitive species with basic technology. They had found apex predators from a death world that made the HFY's own harsh planet look like a peaceful garden. Back on the surface, Morrison was studying the alien positions through a small scope he had salvaged from the Dakota. The HFY had pulled back to what they probably thought was a safe distance. But Morrison had been hunting things that could kill him since he was old enough to hold a rifle. They're scared, he announced to his companions. Look at how they're positioned. That's not an attack formation. That's a defensive perimeter. They're trying to figure out what we are. Webb was working on a jury-rigged communication device, using parts from their emergency kit and pieces of the ship's electronics. If we can establish proper communication, maybe we can resolve this peacefully. Worth a try, Morrison agreed. But Lisa, keep working on those medical patches. Something tells me we're going to need them. Collins had managed to get their emergency beacon working, modified to broadcast on multiple frequencies. If any other human ships are in the area, they'll know we're here and in trouble. The beacon began transmitting, sending out Morrison's voice across the void. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Dakota. We have made contact with an alien species called the HFY. Initial contact was hostile, but we are attempting to establish communication. Be advised, these aliens underestimated human durability. Repeat, human advantages are holding. Zixthak intercepted the transmission and felt his stress glands working. Over time, the message was being broadcast on multiple frequencies, which meant other human vessels might receive it. The situation was spiraling beyond his control. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're detecting response signals. Multiple vessels are acknowledging the human distress call. At least 3 ships are changing course toward this system. The commander realized that his simple plan to eliminate witnesses had become something much more complicated. These humans were not going to die quietly, and now more of them were coming. Worse, they seemed to have figured out that the HFY were afraid of them. Morrison's voice came over the radio again, and this time there was something in his tone that made Zixthak's chitin crawl. HFY Commander, this is Captain Morrison. I know you're listening. We need to talk. You shot at us during a peaceful approach, which means you're either very hostile or very scared. I'm betting on scared, because if you are truly hostile, you would have finished the job by now. The human paused, and Zixthak could hear that disturbing laughter in the background. Here's what's going to happen, Morrison continued. You're going to send a representative to meet with us under a flag of truce. We're going to have a nice conversation about why you attacked an unarmed exploration vessel. And then we're going to figure out how to explain this to the other human ships that are coming to investigate. Another pause, and then Morrison's voice took on a tone that was somehow both friendly and terrifying. Because, Commander, you really don't want to find out what happens when humans stop laughing and start getting serious about a fight. The transmission ended, leaving the Vex High Command Center in stunned silence. They had started the day thinking they were dealing with primitive aliens who could be easily eliminated. Now they were facing the possibility of a war with a species that seemed to find warfare amusing. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Zixthak was beginning to suspect that the humans were not the ones who should be worried about the outcome. Commander Zixthak stared at the communication device for a long time before making his decision. The human was right about one thing. More ships were coming. The Vex High sensors had detected at least 3 vessels approaching the system, and their energy signatures were much larger than the small exploration craft they had shot down. "Prepare a shuttle," he ordered. "I will meet with these humans myself." His tactical officer's antennae twitched with concern. "Sir, is that wise? We know nothing about their intentions. We know they could have killed Scout Leader Vashka and his entire team, but they chose not to," Zixthak replied. "That suggests they might be reasonable. And if more of their kind are coming, I would rather negotiate from a position where I have not murdered their explorers." The shuttle landed 100 meters from the crash site, and Zixthak emerged alone as the humans had requested. He walked slowly toward the wreckage, his compound eyes taking in every detail of the scene. The humans had been busy during the few hours since the first encounter. They had built a defensive position using pieces of their destroyed ship, arranged in a way that provided cover while still allowing for conversation. It was the work of people who understood both warfare and diplomacy. More concerning, they had somehow managed to repair several of their devices and were clearly monitoring his approach. Captain Morrison stepped out from behind a piece of hull plating, and Zixthak got his first close look at a human. The creature was smaller than he had expected, but there was something in the way it moved that suggested coiled strength. The burn marks from the energy weapons were clearly visible across its body, yet it showed no signs of pain or weakness. "Commander Zixthak." "I assume?" Morrison said, his voice calm and conversational. "Thank you for coming. I'm Captain Jake Morrison, and these are Dr. Lisa Webb and Engineer Pete Collins." The other 2 humans emerged from their positions. Like Morrison, they bore the marks of their encounter with Vex High weapons, yet they moved with confidence and purpose. Zixthak had seen veteran warriors who showed more effects from minor injuries than these creatures displayed from wounds that should have been fatal. "You wish to speak," Zixthak said carefully. "I am here." Morrison gestured to a flat piece of metal that had been arranged as a makeshift table. "Please sit, or whatever passes for sitting in your species. We have a lot to discuss." As they settled into position, Zixthak found himself studying the humans more closely. Their faces were mobile and expressive in a way that was alien to his experience. Most galactic species had limited facial expressions, but these creatures seemed to communicate as much with their features as with their words. "Let me start with the obvious question," Morrison said. "Why did you attack an unarmed exploration vessel that was trying to establish peaceful contact?" Zixthak's mandibles clicked nervously. The truth would reveal the illegal mining operation, but lying to these creatures seemed both pointless and dangerous. "We were not expecting contact. Your arrival was seen as a threat to our operations here." "What operations?" Dr. Webb asked, her voice carrying the tone of someone who already suspected the answer. "Mining operations," Zixthak admitted. "This system was supposed to be uninhabited." Morrison and his companions exchanged glances that somehow conveyed entire conversations. It was another unsettling aspect of human behavior, their ability to communicate complex ideas through subtle gestures and expressions. Mining operations that you didn't want witnesses to see, Morrison said. It was not a question. The Galactic Council has very strict rules about environmental protection, Zixthek said defensively. But there are practical considerations in running a profitable extraction business. Collins, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. So you shot at us because you're running an illegal strip mining operation and didn't want anyone to report. The blunt summary made Zixthek flinch. Put that way, it sounded even worse than it was. The corporate collective has significant investments in this operation. The loss of profits would be ... substantial. Morrison leaned back and let out a sound that Zixthek was beginning to recognize as human laughter. But this was different from the unsettling laughter during the battle. This was the sound of someone who found a situation genuinely amusing rather than threatening. Commander, let me explain something about humans, Morrison said. We've been dealing with corporations. That put profit over people for about as long as we've had corporations. What you're describing isn't alien to us. It's Tuesday. Dr. Webb was examining a datapad that she had somehow managed to salvage and repair. The ecological damage readings I'm getting from this planet are extensive. You've been strip mining here for months. The planet was uninhabited, Zixthek protested. There was no intelligent life to be harmed. Intelligence isn't the only thing that matters, Webb replied. This planet had a complete ecosystem. Unique plant and animal life that will never exist anywhere else in the universe. And you're destroying it for profit. Morrison held up a hand to prevent the conversation from becoming an argument. The environmental damage is a problem, but it's not why we're here. We're explorers, not environmental police. The bigger issue is what happens now. What do you mean? Zixthek asked. Well, you attacked us during a peaceful first contact attempt. That's generally considered an act of war in most civilizations. But here's the thing. We don't particularly want a war with your people. Wars are expensive, messy, and people get hurt. Morrison paused and looked directly at Zixthek with eyes that seemed to see right through him. But we also can't let you think that shooting at human ships is acceptable behavior. So we need to find a solution that works for everyone. What kind of solution? Zixthek asked, though he suspected he was not going to like the answer. First, you're going to stop the illegal mining and begin environmental restoration of this planet. Dr. Webb will provide you with the technical specifications for what needs to be done. Webb nodded and held up her datapad. I've already begun compiling a restoration plan. It will take about 5 years and cost approximately twice what you've made in profits here. Zixthek felt his stress glands flooding his system with chemicals. The corporate collective will never agree to that. Then maybe it's time for the corporate collective to learn about consequences, Morrison said calmly. Because option 2 is that we report this incident to both the Galactic Council and the human government. I suspect the Galactic Council takes a dim view of species who attack during peaceful first contact attempts. And the human government? Zixthek asked reluctantly. Morrison's smile was not entirely reassuring. Humans tend to take personal offense when someone shoots at our exploration crews. The ships that are coming to investigate aren't just explorers, Commander. One of them is a heavy cruiser with a full Marine battalion aboard. The implications of that statement sank in slowly. Zixthek had seen what 3 injured humans could do to a squad of ex-high soldiers. The idea of facing hundreds of healthy, angry humans with military training was terrifying. There is a third option, Morrison continued. You could view this as an opportunity rather than a disaster. What do you mean? Humans are new to galactic civilization. We're going to need guides, teachers, trading partners. the species that helps us navigate galactic politics and establish ourselves as responsible members of the galactic community, could benefit significantly from that relationship. Dr. Webb looked up from her datapad. Plus, human technology might be primitive by your standards, but we approach problems differently than most species. That can be valuable in unexpected ways. Collins nodded agreement. On Earth, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. We've spent our entire evolutionary history solving problems that most species never had to face. Morrison leaned forward and extended his hand toward Zixtek in a gesture the Vex High Commander did not recognize. So what do you say, Commander? Do we solve this problem together, or do we let it become a much bigger problem for everyone involved? Zixtek looked at the offered hand, then at the three humans who had somehow turned a military disaster into a diplomatic opportunity. These creatures had been shot at, crashed, and wounded, yet they were offering partnership rather than demanding revenge. It was, he realized, probably the most alien thing about them yet. Slowly, carefully, he reached out and touched Morrison's hand with one of his claws. I believe, he said, that we should discuss terms. Morrison's grin was bright enough to light up the entire crash site. Now that, he said, is what I call a successful first contact. 3 days later, the first human reinforcements arrived in the system. A USS Montana dropped out of hyperspace with a kind of dramatic flare that announced its presence to every sensor within a light year. Behind it came two smaller vessels, the exploration ship Endeavour and the science vessel Discovery. Captain Amy Foster stood on the bridge of the Montana, studying the tactical display that showed both human and Vex-High ships in what appeared to be a peaceful formation around the planet. Her Marine escort, Colonel Rick Hayes, stood beside her with the expression of someone who had been looking forward to a fight and was not entirely sure how he felt about finding a diplomatic solution. Instead, status report from Captain Morrison, the communications officer, announced. All human personnel are alive and in good condition. Negotiations with the alien species have been successful. He's requesting permission to come aboard for a full briefing. Foster smiled as she read Morrison's report. Trust Jake to turn a first contact disaster into a diplomatic victory. Grant permission, and tell him to bring his new alien friends. I want to meet the species that thought shooting at Jake Morrison was a good idea. An hour later, Morrison stood in the Montana's main briefing room, looking remarkably good for someone who had been shot multiple times and crashed on an alien planet. The medical team had patched up the worst of his injuries, but the burn marks and bruises were still visible. Next to him stood Commander Zixtek, who seemed to be having trouble believing he was aboard a human warship and still alive. So let me understand this correctly, Foster said as she reviewed Morrison's report. They shot you during peaceful first contact. Your ship crashed. They sent ground troops to finish you off. You laughed at them, and now you're all friends? That's a simplified version, but essentially accurate, Morrison replied with a grin. Turns out they were more scared of us than we were of them. Colonel Hayes leaned forward in his chair. Captain, with respect, they attacked a human vessel without provocation. That's an act of war by any reasonable standard. It would be, Morrison agreed. But Commander Zixtek has made some very reasonable proposals for making amends. And, more importantly, he's helped us understand something crucial about how humans are going to fit into galactic civilization. Zixtek's mandibles clicked nervously as all eyes turned to him. If I may explain, he said carefully, the Vex-High Corporate Collective has reviewed the situation and agrees that our response was ... inappropriate. We are prepared to make full restitution for the attack on your vessel. What kind of restitution? Hayes asked suspiciously. Dr. Webb, who had accompanied Morrison to the meeting, activated a holographic display showing the mining planet. They're going to restore the ecological damage they caused, at their own expense. They're also providing us with detailed maps of this region of space, including locations of other civilizations and trade routes. And, Morrison added, they're offering to sponsor humanity's introduction to the Galactic Council. Apparently, having an established species vouch for you makes the whole process much smoother. Foster raised an eyebrow. That's quite generous. For people who were trying to kill you a few days ago. Zixthik shifted uncomfortably. We have had time to research human capabilities more thoroughly. The corporate collective believes that maintaining positive relations with your species is advisable. What kind of research? Hayes asked. Morrison's grin widened. Show them the report, Commander. Zixthak activated his own display device. And suddenly, the briefing room was filled with data about Earth and human civilization. The assembled officers grew very quiet as they absorbed what the aliens had learned about their species. According to our analysis, Zixthak said, humans evolved on what galactic civilization classifies as a class 12 death world. Most spacefaring species evolve on class 4 or 5 worlds at most. Your planet is so hostile that it should not have been able to produce intelligent life. The display showed Earth's geological activity, weather patterns, and native life forms. Each image made the human officers sit up a little straighter as they realized how their home world looked to alien eyes. Your species demonstrates physical resilience that exceeds any known galactic race, Zixthak continued. You can survive injuries that would kill most beings. You can function in environments that would be lethal to others. And your psychological adaptation to stress and danger is unprecedented. But that's not what convinced the corporate collective to negotiate, Morrison interjected. Show them the other part. Zixthak's display shifted to show human historical data. Your species has a documented history of turning disadvantages into advantages. When faced with superior enemies, you develop new tactics. When confronted with impossible odds, you find ways to make them merely difficult. And when threatened with extinction, you become more dangerous, not less. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Foster was the first to speak. So they're not making amends because they feel guilty about shooting at us, she said slowly. They're making amends because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Fear is too simple. A word, Zixthak replied. It is more accurate to say that we recognize humans as a species that it would be unwise to have as enemies and very beneficial to have as allies. Morrison stood up and walked to the window that showed the planet below. The Visai mining equipment was already being converted for environmental restoration work, and human and alien ships were working together to coordinate the effort. The funny thing is, he said, we didn't set out to intimidate anyone. We just wanted to explore, make contact, maybe learn something about the galaxy. But it turns out that the same qualities that helped us survive on Earth are exactly what make other species nervous. Dr. Webb nodded agreement. From an anthropological perspective, it's fascinating. Most species develop civilization by overcoming their environment through technology. We developed technology by refusing to let our environment overcome us. Colonel Hayes was studying the tactical implications with a professional eye. So what you're telling me is that the galaxy is full of species who gave up fighting when things got difficult, and we come from a world where giving up meant dying. That's one way to put it, Morrison replied. The other way is that we're a species that learned to laugh in the face of death because the alternative was going crazy from fear. Foster looked at Commander Zixthak with new understanding. And you figured this out from watching Morrison get shot and keep walking. The psychological profile was illuminating, Zixthak admitted. Most species respond to mortal injury with panic, despair, or shock. Captain Morrison responded with amusement. Our Zenub psychologists are still trying to understand how that is possible. Morrison turned back to the group with a smile that was both friendly and slightly unsettling. It's simple, really. On Earth, if you let pain stop you from moving, something bigger and meaner was going to come along and eat you. So we learned that pain is just information, fear is just a warning system, and the only real failure is giving up. He gestured toward the window where human and Vex-High ships worked side by side. The galaxy is full of species who are smarter than us, more advanced than us, and more civilized than us. But apparently, we're the only ones who think getting shot at is funny. Which brings us to the real question, Foster said. What happens now? How does this change humanity's relationship with galactic civilization? Zixthek's antennae twitched in what Morrison had learned was the Vex-High equivalent of a nervous smile. Word of this encounter is already spreading through galactic communication networks. The species that laughs when shot and keeps advancing. The apex predators from the death world. The ones who turn disasters into opportunities. Sounds like we're developing quite a reputation, Hayes observed. Indeed, Zixthek replied. The Galactic Council is very interested in meeting you. So are several military alliances, trading consortiums, and research institutes. It appears that humanity's introduction to galactic society will be anything but quiet. Morrison looked around the room at his fellow humans and his new alien ally. Well, he said with the kind of grin that had made Vex-High soldiers retreat. In confusion, it's going to be an interesting ride. Outside the window, the stars waited. And somewhere among them, other species were learning that the galaxy had a new player, one that had spent millions of years, learning that the proper response to being shot at was not to fall down and die, but to chuckle and keep on coming. The age of human space exploration had officially begun, and the galaxy would never be quite the same.